Prisons are known for being heavily guarded facilities. However, there have been countless prison breaks throughout the years that have resulted in violent criminals roaming the streets of major cities around the world. Before we get started, make sure you hit that like button and ring the notification bell to keep up to date with our future videos. This man defied all odds and managed to escape from prison using a tiny food hatch located in his cell. Choi Gap Bach was a career criminal who was arrested under suspicion of robbery. Reports seem to differ regarding Choi's court cases, but some news outlets seem to suggest that Choi was the leader of a group of robbers that had been striking all through Korea for several years. If this is true, it likely explains why Choi was being watched so closely while in prison, though not close enough. Choi was known to have practiced yoga for at least 23 years. This made him incredibly flexible and agile, which explains how he became such a skilled robber. He was finally captured on September 12th, being placed in police custody while he awaited trial. However, Choi had plans. He remained with police for about 5 days before he created a plan of escape on September 17th. This is another area where news sources seem to differ. Some reports indicate that Choi lathered himself in body ointment, though others say he slathered himself in food products such as peanut butter. Either way, Choi lubed himself up from head to toe and contorted his body into a small enough shape that he could fit through the food tray hatch that was located in his cell. According to the Huffington Post, this hatch was only 5.9 inches tall and 17 inches wide. This would be completely impossible for a normal person to slide through. However, Choi was a small man, measuring 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighing less than 130 pounds. Choi waited for all 3 of the prison guards to fall asleep, then opened the hatch and made his escape. After he had freed himself from the cell, he climbed out of an open window and ran to freedom. He fled the scene barefoot and ran to a nearby home. He broke in and stole a credit card and car keys from the occupants before fleeing once again. Nearby residents called police to inform them of the break-in, with local authorities setting up checkpoints throughout the surrounding area. Choi was initially believed to have been fleeing the area in the stolen car, though he ditched the car about 200 meters from the nearest checkpoint. You'd think this would be the end of Choi's story. He gets caught by the police and taken back to prison, right? Wrong. Choi abandoned the car on the side of the road and continued his barefoot escape, trekking up a nearby mountain, making his way to the top of Mount Nam, then heading toward Mount Huoc. This eventually brought him to the area of Miryang. He managed to evade police detection as he would hide away in the mountains throughout the day, making his move at night. Police typically only searched in the daylight hours, so Choi was able to move around the nearby mountain ranges without being caught. Police began to implement mobilized squads to locate Choi, as well as employing at least 8 sniffer dogs and helicopters. About 4 days after his escape, Choi made a very bold decision to enter a bus to ride from the Miryang area to Changwon. He thought that he'd been making progress throughout his escape, but a soldier on the bus recognized him and exited the bus to tell the police. Choi knew that the police were hot on his trail, so he requested for the bus to be stopped, pretending as though he had motion sickness. He requested to be let off the bus so he could walk the remaining distance to his destination. Police anticipated this and warned nearby residents of Choi's whereabouts. Search crews were soon implemented in the nearby mountain ranges to continue their search for the man, but he was nowhere to be found. However, police did find various clues that proved they were on the right track. One of the clues they located was a note that had been written on a ripped page from a calendar. The note was found in the hut of an elderly farm worker who reported it to the police. The note read, "I am sorry. Signed, framed thief, Choi Gap Bach." The residents of the home initially thought that the note was a prank, so they never reported it to the police. However, as the days passed, they began to notice the various items around the home were missing. They also noticed someone had stolen 2 packets of ramen and that the stove had been tampered with. At least 400 police officers were called to the area to continue their search, using helicopters to search every nearby mountain in the area. Various sightings of Choi were reported to police, with them eventually tracking him down and finding him behind a water cooler. As they arrested him, he repeatedly shouted that he had been framed and did nothing wrong. Though if this were the case, we can't help but wonder why he didn't simply plead his innocence in court. When he was finally arrested, police escorted the barefoot man back to prison. They knew he would simply escape his cell once again if they placed him in the same room, so they opted to place him in a cell with no bars, immediately next to the cell he'd escaped. This cell had a much smaller food slot, ensuring he would not be able to escape again. Interestingly, this was not the only time Choi had escaped prison. Korea Times reports that Choi had been arrested once before. He was then loaded onto a bus that had been carrying several other prisoners. Still being adept in yoga, he was able to twist his body to fit through 2 of the metal bars that held the prisoners in the transport van. He was on the run for 2 days before police finally located him. It would be another 22 years before he would be arrested again, making his infamous 2012 escape through the food slot. However, this wasn't the only time a prisoner escaped from a highly monitored prison. In 1975, Susan LaFave was arrested when she was caught selling illegal substances to undercover police officers in Michigan. She was taken to trial and was given a 20-year prison sentence for her involvement in the local substance abuse problem. However, after only serving a year and 19 days of her sentence, she managed to scale a barbed wire fence and escape the prison during outdoor hours. Her grandmother had been waiting for her on the other side of the fence, presumably as a getaway driver. Later on, with just $200 in her wallet, Susan decided to flee to California. She changed her name and worked various jobs around town as she couldn't use her social security number to get a real job. As time passed, Susan eventually met a man named Alan Walsh, and the two married. They lived together for over 22 years and had 3 children that they raised in a high-end part of town. She never informed her family of her previous life, though relatives that lived in Michigan tipped her off that police were aware of her location. Finally, in April of 2008, while Susan was on her front lawn working in the garden, she was approached by federal agents who arrested her and took her back to Michigan. She was sent to prison once again for 13 months before being released on parole. Frederick Barrett was a 20-year-old man back in 1971 when he began hitchhiking alongside his friend on a local road. He was picked up by a man named Carl Ardolino. As Carl was driving them to their supposed destination, Frederick and his friend began to attack him, trying to rob him of his vehicle. Carl fought them off for a time, but the men overpowered him, pulling the vehicle over and leaving his body in a ditch. The two were eventually caught, and Frederick was sentenced to life in prison in Florida. He remained there for about 8 years, before a power outage cut lighting to the prison, giving Frederick just enough time to flee. He ran through the prison gates, climbed 3 large barbed wire fences, and made his escape. After he freed himself, he traveled through various states before settling in a remote cabin in Colorado. He managed to live here for the next 30 years, completely undetected. However, in 2009, Florida created a task force that specialized in hunting down wanted criminals. One of these criminals happened to be Frederick, with police saying he was shockingly easy to locate. Law enforcement men arrived at Frederick's doorstep under the guise of being firemen. They noticed that the man in the cabin had tattoos that matched the description of Frederick's tattoos, meaning they had found their missing man after more than 30 years. He was arrested and taken back to prison to serve out his sentence. In the fall of 1970, 25-year-old Ronald Karns was arrested and convicted of robbing a convenience store while armed. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison for his crime, but managed to escape after only serving 3 years. He fled to the state of Washington and began living under 2 different aliases, both Will Cox and Louis Vance. After Ronald had settled into his new living arrangements, he began work at a company that managed mail-in rebate forms for an office supplier. He did very well for himself at this job and became good friends with his boss. The two trusted each other wholeheartedly. Years later, the boss stated that Ronald was one of the best workers. However, he noted that Ron wasn't engaging with the other workers and didn't ever mention family or friends outside of work. In 2013, he made the mistake of filing for a social security card using his fake alias. This proved to be a mistake, as the computer system connected him to his criminal history when his photo was taken for his new ID. He was arrested and sent back to prison to serve the remainder of his 20-year sentence. He managed to remain a free man for 41 years.